So the very first passage of mock 12, and what does it talk about? Cuttlefish, a passage that belongs to the genre called biology, introduces us to this fascinating creature called cuttlefish and then dives deep into the way this creature goes on to camouflage itself. And then there is a discussion of how that camouflage really goes about. So the very first paragraph tells you that they camouflage, but no one knows how to. Then the next one talks about the various ways in which they actually do that, or various things that they use in order to do that. Thereafter, if you look at the third one, it talks about an experiment, and thereafter fourth and fifth again go ahead and extend that experiment and talk about some of the learnings and the things that we could not learn on the basis of the experiments so far. And then finally there is a new thought that is embedded into this particular paragraph towards the end. So let's dive into our questions. So question number 1, all of the following can be inferred except. So what does it mean? Hopefully 3 of these options are true and 1 is not true, and the one that is not true is something that we should mark as our answer. Now when I looked at the passage, I found A, B and D to be true on the basis of these respective parts. So you notice the third paragraph has this particular line: an extensive body of research has established that cuttlefish can reach their final pattern in less than a second. So look at it, it probably decides in a fraction of a second. So considering that the final output is being created in less than a second, of course it has to happen in a fraction of a second, and even there, to be on the safer side, the answer also uses the word probably. So that's definitely probable and therefore true. Then if you look at B, a part of second paragraph along with a part of fifth paragraph help us determine that B is true. So chromatophores, papillae, these things of course help us find out that these are in fact the things that are used to mimic that pattern. And then D, it is not certain how cuttlefish gained the sense of pattern matching, coordinating side and muscle movement. Look at this part. We believe they have some knowledge of the pattern they expressed at a given time. He said how that is acquired, we do not know. So that helps us determine D as true as well. But let me take you back to another sentence of the fifth paragraph. See, it might be that they are using their eyes to check their coloration, but it could also be that the cuttlefish is aiming for a certain feeling in its skin. No one is sure of the answer. Now match that with C. C says researchers have discovered how the cuttlefish sees a pattern and translates into a pattern on the skin. Have they discovered it? Well, the passage says no one is sure of the answer, and therefore C is false, and that is why our answer to question number 1 should be option C. Let's move over to the next one. Which one of the following, if true, would best complement the passage's finding? Now I think some of us could be confused. When we say complement, it means that it is consistent or it supports whatever is given in the passage. Now the issue here is that does A go with it? But then, isn't it already mentioned in the passage? When something complements, you're bringing in something new. But then A is something that is mentioned in the passage. Similarly, if you look at B, again mentioned, consistent with the passage, but mentioned there. C, consistent with the passage, but once again mentioned there. D, on the other hand, talks about something that is consistent as well as new. It is not something, look at this part. It is not something that has been mentioned in the passage. And even this part, very complex, is not explicitly stated, though I think we can perhaps infer it. And that is what makes D the best answer choice of the given lot. Then moving over to the next. In which one of the following scenarios would the cuttlefish's behavior demonstrate that their camouflage is not a learned strategy? So what is a learned strategy? A strategy that you have refined or arrived at after experience, after learning about it. It is not genetic. So which of the following is not a learnt strategy? So let us see. A, when cuttlefish get closer to a new pattern, their movement towards it is slower. Now let's just think, can it be a learnt strategy? See, in my case, one fine day, quite a few years ago, I read a research. That research told me that 90% of the accidents happen when people are about to reach their destination. Okay, especially the driving accidents. Okay, reason, people remain very conscious and very careful throughout their journeys, but when they're about to reach their destination, they relax, they start taking things easy, and that is when mistakes happen. When I went through that, when I went through that lesson, that learning, I started ensuring that I exercise enough caution even when I'm close. So I was in a way slower. So in that case, it was a learned strategy. So for cuttlefish too, it could be a learned strategy. We cannot definitively say that it is not a learned strategy, and therefore A can be ruled out. B, in the intermittent motion, the pauses get longer as the cuttlefish gets closer to the end goal. Maybe. It can be a learned strategy. Maybe cuttlefish realizes that this is an approach that is more helpful, is more useful. So nothing here to say that it is not a learned strategy. You can take myriad examples. When people work out in a gym, they tend to take some rest between sets. So there are times when you may increase or decrease the duration of that rest between the sets because you've learned that a higher duration or a lower duration is better, right? C, some groups of cuttlefish used more chromatophores and papillae in their camouflage. Now this could be genetic, considering that we are talking about just some groups, but then it can also be a learned strategy because these groups are not exactly segregated on the genetic basis. It's like maybe a group of athletes, they learned something new and then they adjusted their training strategy accordingly. So it was on the basis of that learning. So similarly here in cuttlefish too, it can be on the basis of some learning, not necessarily genetic, because once again the groups are not formed on the basis of the genetic makeup. We're not talking about certain specific species or subspecies. Okay, D, the cuttlefish use different routes for every pattern they mimicked regardless of the familiarity to the background. Now see, this very clearly tells us something, that they are familiar with the background. They've encountered that background earlier, yet they use different route. What does that tell us? If they're learning, then after familiarizing with a particular background and then adjusting yourself with that, won't you adopt that same route if you are learning? Because that's efficient, then it saves you that necessary time to think, contemplate. But considering that they are using different routes, it tells us that they definitely do not or are not learning. And that is why we can say that D tells us it is not a learned strategy, and therefore our answer to the question. And with that, let's dive over to our fourth and the last question of the passage. Which of the following assumptions is implicit in the following statement? That suggests that the animals are not learning a strategy for achieving a goal the way humans do when they learn to walk or pick up objects. Now, when I went to the options, I realized that it has a very foundational assumption here. So foundational assumptions are like, very obvious assumptions. And because they're obvious, we at times tend to miss out on that. For example, now imagine if I offer a piece of advice to someone, I always have this belief underpinning that advice that, hey, this person may listen to what I say. That is why I'm offering that piece, right? That's why I'm offering that suggestion. If I believe that this person will not even listen to me, why would I really waste my precious moments advising that person? So it's a very foundational assumption. If you're offering advice, you must believe that, okay, this person may act on that or may be open to that, right? Similarly, in this particular case, when you say that that there is a strategy for achieving a goal the way humans do, we are assuming that humans use strategy for achieving goals, right? And that is where you can say that, hey, cuttlefish are different from humans, and that is given to us in option A, a very foundational assumption. If you negate it, I'm a big proponent of negation test. If you negate it, you cannot even arrive at this statement given to us by the question. Superior is irrelevant. Cuttlefish are not goal oriented will again be negate it. If you say cuttlefish are goal oriented, we can still say that okay, they are different from humans, they use a different sort of goal orientation, so the statement is possible. And then you don't really need to have unique added to this. So A still scores over D, and that is why our answer here should be option A, right? So that's about passage 1, and I hope that this discussion helps you streamline your thought process.